Hey guys, welcome to SheKnowsArsenal. My name is Jessica. I'm your host. You can follow me on Twitter at JacinioTweets and at SheKnowsArsenal. Welcome to another episode. We are going to be chit-chatting about what happened yesterday. But before we get started, make sure you guys like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'm just going to check the connection. Of course, as soon as I press go, it looked like it went out a little bit. So give me 1 second. Let me see. Looks like the connection is not great. So there you go. I may have to go out and come back in. Let me know if you guys can see me or not. I feel like you guys can't because I'm looking at it and it doesn't look great. Let's see. Still, I'm sorry, guys. I'm still here. I'm just trying to figure out if I'm frozen. Okay, I'm frozen. I need to go out. I'm going to come out and go. All right, let's see if that's any better. Can't tell. Just give me 1 sec. Oh. Okay. It's not amazing, but it's better. It's not like totally frozen, but it's still kind of like blurry. I can tell. Oh well, hopefully it gets better. All right, guys, welcome to SheKnowsArsenal. Like I'm saying, we are going to have, I think, a therapy session off of the back of what happened yesterday. We got destroyed. We got destroyed. That's it. We got destroyed. We were absolutely manhandled yesterday by Manchester City. There's no way to spin it. And there's a multitude of reasons, a lot of layers to unpack about like how that happened, how it came to be, all those types of things. And so we just have to kind of hold that. You know what I mean? We just have to hold it. Like, I do see that there's a lot of, trying to figure out how to make it seem as though we haven't bottled the league. I know people don't like that word because it's harsh, doesn't feel good, but we had it in our hands. Had we had done better against, it's just like last season for me. I feel like last season was very similar, where had we had just won the smaller games, we wouldn't have had to go into the Manchester City game feeling like we needed that win. And I think needing that win meant that the players just could not mentally or physically get up for that game, quite similarly to Spurs and Newcastle. We had more than a decent enough team to go out there and at least have a competitive match. But like those two matches and the match last night, they were just training ground exercises for the opposition, and we just were like nowhere to be seen. And from my perspective, like that's not like it's not just tactics and all that kind of stuff. Like literally the team could like mentally and physically couldn't get up for the game because they were crippled by fear, because they knew they had to win that game. And that comes from making mistakes, being maybe overconfident, nervous, whatever, in the games that came before it. And being able to manage your nerves and your mental prior to a really big game is something that Arsenal, not just in the Arteta era, but like in eras prior to his, where Arsenal haven't really they just haven't been able to do it. And so mentality is just something that it's just something that the Arsenal just don't have, and that's not to say that they won't get it eventually. But I think what you can say is, like, right now, the team does not have the mentality to, like, calm themselves prior to a big game. And that big game coming up swallows them up so much that they can't even perform in games where they should be winning. And, there's just so many things to, like, touch on. Like, I have a document up here, and when I was writing, like, all the things I wanted to talk to you guys about, it just, like, kept going and kept going and kept going, because I feel like people want to pin it on one specific thing. And I feel like when we want to pin it on one specific thing, a lot of times that's because we have an agenda that we want to get across, right? If you don't like Arteta, it was just his fault. If you don't like Rob Holding, or you think we shouldn't have given him a new contract, you just want to pin it on that. If you thought the January transfer window was crap, you just want to blame it on recruitment. If you're not a fan of Saka because you wanted Pepe to stay because you hate Arteta, then it's because it's Saka. I can go trace back the agenda, especially when people want to blame it on one thing. But Arsenal's end to the season, or end of the title race, really just is not a one thing. It is a layer upon layer of things that have went wrong, probably from about halfway through the season. And so we're going to talk about that for sure. But just kind of like starting off with the game, quite frankly, like, this is why when I lost my shit after we lost to Manchester City at home, I knew people would come back and be like, maybe would kind of remember that moment and say, okay, I understand why you were so upset. It wasn't because, Manchester City were better or anything like that. It was just because at the end of the season, the last thing you want is for a young team to have to beat Manchester City at the Etihad. It's a suicide mission. They're never going to be able to do it unless something miraculous happens. Like, it just was never going to happen. And so winning at the Emirates was, to me, like a sliding doors type of, or, kind of moment, because in the title race, in recent years, in competitive title races, I don't really think I've ever seen a team not have a statement away win at either a place where they're not meant to get points, or against the team that they're actively battling against to win the title, right? And people were telling me that we could lose to Manchester City twice and win the league. It just doesn't happen that way. Points-wise, it can happen, but we all know that sports psychology exists. And the psychological impact of losing to Manchester City at home meant that it was always up in their head that they would potentially have to go to the Etihad and beat them there, which was never going to happen. They were never going to have the mentality to do it, especially without their starting 11 crumbling at the end, kind of feeling like that lack of belief, like it was never going to happen. And so I hope, like, we have all kind of learned that, like, in a title race, you can't lose to the team that you are actively going up against, especially if it's Manchester City. You can't lose to them twice. And so us being terrible at the Emirates was kind of like a sliding doors moment in the title race. It really was. That's when even statistically things changed, and Arsenal just do not manage the big moments well, because we started to capitulate before we had to play them at the Emirates. And again, once we got to where we saw that Manchester City game was on the horizon, and people started talking about it being like the title decider, we messed up at Anfield, we messed up at West Ham, we messed up at home against Southampton, and we basically put ourselves again in a situation where we had to win that game. And when Arsenal have to win, they don't. And so mentality is key, managing moments is key. And one of the things that I wrote down is, Gary Neville may not have gotten everything right, but one thing he did get right was the emotional aspect of things. And that's something that I've kind of readjusted over the last couple of weeks, is that although the youthful exuberance is great, and that's what can get you over the line in certain moments, in a title race, like, you have to be able to manage your emotion, like, win the game, let it be done, lose the game, let it be done. And Arsenal tend to let wins and highs go too long, and losses go too long. And really, the emotion that we had really peaked in like February, and we've been kind of like fighting since then, fighting since then. And we've just kind of like tapered off now. Whereas Manchester City, you can see that their emotion is now getting to that height now towards the end. Managing your emotions like is definitely something that I don't think Arsenal have done really well. And I think is another thing that kind of contributed. So it's something that they'll learn, hopefully, but we probably just were not cool enough for long enough. We really kind of had like way too emotional moments, maybe too early, and we didn't have like the physical and mental capacity when things got difficult later on. We didn't have any more of that because we expended it early, trying to beat Aston Villa, trying to beat Bournemouth, stuff like that. Had we had been able to have a win like we did against Bournemouth, against Southampton, we probably would have had a little bit of energy left. And so that's definitely something that I'm looking at for next season. Like, okay, if we, for some reason, are in a situation where it feels like we're in a title race again, let's not even start talking about it. We know that it takes, it's 38 games. And I was reluctant to say that, we were in the title race and we were going to win it and stuff like that. But I do think that some people went too early, and then now we're all kind of like feeling the repercussions of that. And so hopefully we've learned that for sure. Ursa Major says those 3 draws was our undoing. That was the end for sure. Arsenal Forever says, I can't see where our next win will come from. I mean, it could come against Chelsea. They're terrible. And the one thing that I do think that we're starting to get into this like doom and gloom where we have to tear everything up and, everything is a wash and all that kind of stuff. I'm not fully on board with that. I can separate what we're doing from the title race and, how we've gotten here and the last couple of games, and, if you don't think we can win another game from now until the end of the season, I think you're just kind of being like a baby. And like, maybe you just need to like reel in your emotions. Like, we will win another game from now until the end of the season. Like, don't be silly. Steve says Saliba didn't help. Andre says Xhaka allowed his emotions not to get us the win at Liverpool. There was like several moments within like this kind of like period where I did feel like the senior players really let us down is emotionally, and no, this is not to take away any sort of, because we'll talk about like Saka and Martinelli and all that kind of stuff too, because I do think that like, there is kind of like a desperation to also stick the boot into them as well. So we'll talk about that too. But just in regards to like senior players in general, like I found that Xhaka's, the way that he was against Liverpool, I didn't say it was 100% him, but like Holding, there are things that people do that are not the only reason why you lost the game, but do contribute to it and sometimes can be avoidable. And Xhaka had 2 moments like that where he had the Liverpool moment, wasn't the only reason, but it just showed a lack of composure in a moment where we didn't need any of that. It was too early in the game to be having moments like that anyway, just walk away. And then he also had a moment, I think, against West Ham where we were winning the game and I saw him and Holding smiling, smiling and kind of joking because we were beating them 2-0 and, and stuff like that. And it's just like, I don't need to see any smiles or anything. We need to see 100% focus, no, looking, no silliness. And I felt like he had a part to play in that because he kind of had like that weird arrogance where, this is going to sound harsh, but as good of a season as Granit Xhaka has had, we can and should upgrade upon him. And he's not good enough to be, goading anybody, smiling, laughing, anything like that, so, and he's supposed to be a leader. Jesus, he also got really caught up in the, dark arts, trying to get fouls. He kind of reminded me a little bit of Lacazette in that way, where when we got under pressure, instead of staying up on your feet and just playing the game, you were trying to, manipulate the situation into getting fouls and you weren't getting them. You're going down easy and just kind of being like a nothing out there. And it's harsh to say, but like against Manchester City, I was very worried about his impact on the game because I felt like it would be pretty much nothing. And that's exactly what it was. And it reminded me a lot of Lacazette, where you're pretty much out of the game before it even started. Thomas Partey, another senior player that has completely lost, his cookies over the last couple of games. I don't know if he's injured, but again, like when the physio went with him to Ghana, I knew that something was not right. I mean, this is somebody who is either never available during the run-in because he's injured, or he is involved and drop zeros, and that's exactly what he did. I don't know how anybody can watch the last couple of games and feel like he played well. I thought he was poor against Liverpool. People are telling me that he was good. He was not. And so I think that's left a lot of questions in the minds of Arsenal fans about, is experience really experience if the experience doesn't really show up when you really need it to? And that's another thing that maybe Gary Neville has been proved right on, is that Arsenal don't have the leaders that we thought we did. Huddles from Zinchenko at every moment when we're losing a game, cut that shit out. Like, I got it the first time. We didn't need to do it every single time. It just became almost like redundant and like nothing, like it wasn't really doing anything. And quite frankly, what we need is for players to just like step it up when they're out there on the pitch. I get that it was difficult, but in difficult times with the Invincibles and why they were so special and why they were probably our greatest ever team, maybe not our greatest ever team, but our most iconic team, is because they could absorb players like Holding. They had players like Seagan in the team and like average guys that would pop in and out, but the players around them would rise and absorb those guys and still win games. Arsenal are kind of like still in that phase of like, if there's anything different to the lineup, they can't absorb it, especially when things get difficult, because the senior players or the leaders in and around those players, they don't do shit. They just completely fall off a cliff. And that's exactly what Thomas Partey did yesterday. The amounts of times that like Kevin De Bruyne just ran right past him was, I mean, hang your head in shame. The only time we saw any emotion from Thomas Partey is when he was getting, into little scuffles with Jack Grealish. Like, we don't need that. And so that was probably his second worst performance. The first one being against Spurs, where he just kind of like walked off the pitch. He doesn't have the composure, the mentality in the difficult moments when it matters. And so again, experience is not experience if it doesn't show up when it matters. And so the emotional aspect of things, I can kind of understand the younger players not having the composure, but Zinchenko, Jesus, Xhaka, Partey, unacceptable for me, really. We definitely need to like think about that moving forward, because the level of ruthlessness that needs to happen in the summer is something that I'm not sure that I've ever seen Arsenal be. We tend to be sentimental, give people additional chances, trust people when they shouldn't be trusted. And I think a lot of players that have been here long enough have kind of shown that when the going gets tough, they get going, Boy says our midfield can't carry itself. They have needed Zinchenko to drop in there all season to make them functional, rebuild the whole thing. Only Odegaard gets to stay, really. Amir says we were 8 points ahead a few weeks ago. Liverpool were something stupid like 15 points ahead and 1 point last season and still lost to single point at the very end. Credit to City. They're ridiculous. I'll preface this entire thing that I understand that City are an amazing team, but two things can be true at one time, where City is the best team in Europe, probably the best team in the world. They were always going to catch us up and they were always going to batter us on the night. But that to me doesn't have really anything to do with our psychological lapse prior to this game. You know what I mean? And if Arsenal want to be a top team, regardless to what City are doing, some of the things that we've done over the last couple of weeks have to be cut out regardless. So I understand that City are great. And I've already feel like giving them their flowers, like Haaland, otherworldly. Kevin De Bruyne, best midfielder that has ever existed in the Premier League. He'll go down as that. They showed us levels. Pep, tactically, superior to Mikel Arteta in every way. He absolutely bopped Arteta on the sideline, like 100%. But when it comes to Arsenal, we can still be critical despite the fact that we probably just lost to the better team. And if in the locker room, what Arsenal are saying and in the boardroom they're saying is that City is just better, that's disappointing, because that shows that we're not taking any accountability for our culpability and not getting things over the line. And that's the conversation that we're having, is not so much about City. It's what can Arsenal do to get closer to them, right? Steve says, Arteta has faith in the wrong players. Why try to fix things when they're not broken? We played so well up to Palace game with Trossard starting. Well, I don't know if I really believe like this whole thing about like, I think Jesus also scored goals and we played well with him in the team, especially at the beginning of matches against, like, I don't think the collapse at Anfield or the collapse at West Ham have anything to do with Jesus playing in that game and starting, because he scored goals in some of those games, so I'm not sure that I believe that like Trossard not being in the team is the reason why we collapse, because for me, the collapse, a lot of it, because we scored enough goals in most of these games to get points. Like, really, it came down to midfield and defense. We haven't been good enough defensively. We didn't have Saliba saving us. His recovery speed and just his overall presence has left us with a void back there. Everybody is trying to compensate for holding back there. There's big gaps in midfield. Thomas Partey has fallen off a physical cliff and a mental cliff. And so I'm not quite sure that like those things can go unnoticed because Trossard is not starting in these games. Now, can Arteta have made better decisions in terms of when to bring Trossard into the game? Yeah. I think that's true. And I think for me, the main one was probably not taking off Vieira at halftime. I don't know if there was so much foresight into not starting Vieira against Southampton. They're bottom of the league with him in the team. We should not have been down, 3-1, right? But at halftime, Vieira should have come off for Trossard 100%. Maybe against Liverpool, he probably maybe should have come in a little bit earlier. But this idea that Jesus just like shouldn't have been starting in some of those games and like that's the reason why we collapsed doesn't make sense when the midfield and the defense were probably the most culpable. But in this game, I always knew that he wouldn't start Jesus against Manchester, or he would start Jesus against Man City, because that I think mentally would have rattled Jesus into a stratosphere of never coming back. I wanted Jesus and Zinchenko drop for this game because, one, I don't think Zinchenko's influence was ever going to be that great against Manchester City, because they're more physical, they're going to control possession, and so there's no point in having him out there. Just play a traditional fullback and just try to defend a little bit more solidly. And Jesus, I just didn't think that he'd get any joy against those big center backs. Like, there's just no way. And, I didn't see it for him. I really didn't. But if Arteta doesn't start them and then we still lose 4-1, do we have a mentally, emotionally, like, a Jesus that we can't use anymore? You know what I mean? Like, if you're not going to start against the team that you left, like in the most important game, what are you going to do with Jesus after that? I don't know if he mentally would respond, so I kind of understand that. I'm not sure if the changes up top are really the ones that needed to happen. I think the midfield and the defense needed to be looked at a little bit more. I think it's more that than Trossard, Mira says their heads was already gone after the West Ham game. Weak mentality. Clearly something is not right with Partey. Not 100% fit. Are there issues with some stuff with some of the players? Manager. Partey was just on a whole, like, it was just the worst performance that I've seen from a top player in a long time. Like, you can't be dropping zeros in the most important games when you're 30 and you're probably like the highest paid guy at the club. It's just unacceptable, really. And so that, coupled with his injury record, coupled with the fact that I think we've also learned that we really lack legs in midfield. I think Partey needs to be somebody that's looked at as maybe moving into a squad position rather than a starting position, because he's unreliable in multiple different ways. So yeah, Aha says whenever Partey and or Zinchenko have poor games, then it becomes long for us. And Odegaard, I mean, it's just that simple. If your midfield doesn't show up, then what are you going to do? And I'm not saying that it would 100% change anything, but I just think the game was clearly calling for a traditional back four. So you could just defend in your lanes and have a little bit of more solidity, and also a double pivot. It's strange to me that we continued with all the gaps in midfield and at the back, that we continued on with a single pivot. If Partey was injured and or mentally, not available to play these games, then he needed support. And so, but he's too proud to drop some of his guys that have to play in these games. And for me, Xhaka was a nothing. I don't know if he was 100% ready to go or not, but even if he was 100% in a game against Manchester City, playing against the best of the best, he's not going to make a dent. He's not going to make a dent. He's just not the type of player that, makes a difference in games like this. Like, we've learned this. He's been at the club for like 7 years now. So I think instead of playing him, play Jorginho and play in a double pivot, be more solid, give yourself a chance. Like, I think just the way that they exploited the obvious gaps so early on in the game, for me, was just like, I know that we probably would have lost anyway, but maybe we could have done it in a less demoralizing way, because it was just so obvious that they were going to do it. But again, like, trusting players is good in some circumstances, because then you can get the best out of the players. I think trusting Martinelli and Saka this season, has been good for us. Trusting Saka over Pepe has worked for us. It does work. But trusting Holding, trusting Xhaka when we know he's going to be a nothing in that game, trusting Partey alone when we've seen numerous, examples of them not being able to do it, is also a flaw. Let's see. Thomas says the players were scared of Man City, sensed it. Amira says it's a shame that the experienced players we're meant to rely on in these big games are the ones letting us down the most. Cini, Partey, Xhaka, Jesus, show your leadership on the pitch, not off it. Yeah, I agree with that. I think, and it's just like, it's the harsh reality of some things. It doesn't mean that I don't rate these players and I don't think that they're quality players. I just think, leadership only matters if you do it when it actually counts. Like, our best ever captains and leaders have always showed it in the games that really matter. They drag the team over the line. They don't hide. They don't only show up when they want to have a little, petty scuffle with somebody when you're getting beat down 4-1, and so what we've learned is we don't have leaders in this team. I think we've learned that this season and last season, is that some of the people that we think are leaders are not. And so we need to rectify that in the summer. It just needs to be rectified. Like, it just clearly needs to be rectified. Period. Let's see. Chris Calloway says, City fan here. Why was Trossard dropped in the last 4 games? He was in good form before that and seemed to make a difference when he came on. He was dropped because Jesus came back in, and the game that it's like, I think this is all hindsight for me, like, because it's not like Jesus isn't in good form. And it's not like our attacking game has like fallen off. Like, again, at the beginning of the game at Anfield, at the beginning of the game at West Ham, we were playing fine. Attacking wise, we were good to go. And he was scoring goals in those games. He had like four goals in 5 games or something like that. So I think all the what Trossard should have started is all hindsight based on the fact that we didn't win these games, but we didn't lose the games in attack. We really didn't. I'm sorry. We lost the games in the midfield. If Thomas Partey is not doing kick-ups and flicks in the middle of the pitch against West Ham, are we talking about Jesus starting over Trossard? No, we're not. And so I'm finding the Jesus conversation against Trossard a little bit hindsighty. And I'm sure as a City fan, maybe you just are trying to stick the boot in a little bit because, Jesus is your ex-player. And it's like, Jesus is, to me, as much of a nothing as he was yesterday. I really do think the focus is midfield and defense for me. It's not like our goal scoring has really just fallen off a cliff, Steve says, people say we're scared. I don't buy that. Nelson come on and put Martinelli and Saka to shame, and he played well. They didn't turn up to play. Well, if you don't turn up, I think a lot of that is scared. So I think we were scared. We were scared of the moment for sure. And the pressure of having to win an impossible game to win in order to keep your title hopes alive. I said after the Southampton game that it was kind of like when they collapsed on the ground with games to go, it was done then. No team should be collapsing the way that they did. It wasn't the last game of the season or anything, but it just showed mentally where they were at. We're at the end of our rope with 6 games to go. Darren says Jesus isn't even fit. Trossard isn't. Hindsight, Jesus missed loads of chances. He missed loads of chances against Southampton. I think that's probably the game that people are really talking about. I remember one cross in from Martinelli. He missed chances in that game. But again, to me, it's still hindsight. Saying that Jesus is not fit when he scored 4 goals in 5 games just sounds a little bit like we're trying to force that narrative. Trossard maybe should have gotten more minutes, like come on for Jesus earlier, but nobody was complaining about Jesus being in those games and Trossard not being in them until we started losing games. Like, that's it. So some of this for me is a little, it stinks a little bit. I know we're not high on Jesus right now because he missed that one really good chance and a couple others against Southampton. And he was kind of like not good yesterday either. But 4 goals in 5 games is a player that you play. It's a player that you play. Chris Smith says, Jess, I agree that Partey should be the upgraded upon. But if Juve were still interested and offered decent money, would you sell? No, because I think I was talking about this in a group chat, is that, despite the situation that we're all just kind of like avoiding and not talking about, if, besides that, putting that to the side, I wouldn't sell him just because like we don't need our team getting weaker. I mean, as bad as Partey has been in certain games, he is better than Elneny and Jorginho. He is, so would I sell Partey and keep Elneny and Jorginho in the team? No, I think Mo Elneny and Jorginho should potentially be moved on prior to the better player. I think Xhaka and Partey need to become squad players, and then the guys that are behind them need to go. So that's what I do for sure. That's what I would say. Let's see. And what's it called? Edry says City has been targeting this game. Arsenal wanted to avoid this game at all costs. I think this is unfortunate. It happened 3 games ago. Really sad, but the same as the previous time. Meet them in February. Yeah, I think you put that perfectly. I want to put it back up on the screen, is that City was excited to play this game. They were targeting it. They knew that if they beat us at the Emirates, because I don't know if you guys remember, but the heat around that game was so important because the narrative instantly shifted to, if we don't beat them at home, then we have to beat them at the Etihad, because I don't know why Arsenal fans felt like we could lose to them twice and win the league. It's just, you have to get something from those games, right? And at the very least, we needed to not lose them. And so when they played us at the Emirates, their tactics were perfect. They allowed us to have the ball. I know that there's a lot of, trying to make it seem as though we were dominating them with possession. They were letting us have the ball because the games prior to that, we had struggled with the ball. So they kind of sat back like Brentford, like Everton, hit us on the break, waited for us to make bad decisions or make mistakes, capitalize on them, easy game away from home from them. Perfect away performance from them. And the way that they celebrated it, you knew that was like check number 1. Beat them here. We'll wait for them to drop more points. We know they will. And then we'll beat them at the Etihad and it'll be done. Whereas Arsenal, like you're saying, we avoided both of those games and were poorly, like we were never at our ultimate in either one of those games in terms of how we went into them. And so we had lost Partey. I don't know why Arteta didn't start Ben White in that game. I thought that was a mistake. It was like, for what reason are you not starting Ben White in a really important game? And so, and we didn't have Jesus in that game at home, so I think that's another conversation as well, like in terms of, how we manage the season in all, like in its entirety. And I felt like in the last 2 seasons, what we've done is, this season for sure, from August, we were really, really good. And we were really good all the way up until maybe February. And then we hit that little patch And then, like I said, from there, we never really regained that form. And we were kind of just like stable. And then we fell off of a cliff right at the end, right? With 5 games to go. Whereas with City, it was like a slow kind of like they were good the whole time, but they plan to be at their ultimate level at the end of the season when you're playing the most games, when they're the most high pressure. And had we had been the level that we are right now, like, or the level that we were like in August, September, if we were playing like that now, we would be in a different position. If we switched our form, switched it, we would be going into the run-in a lot better. Last season was kind of similar as well. We started off poor, but around Norwich, we started gaining some form. And then, but we still did the same thing where after that March international break has to be something that's looked at, I think, from an Arsenal perspective, is if we're going into that and we're coming out of it, basically like with players missing, players looking like crap, players looking like, and also managing it. Like Saka shouldn't even played in them games. Like the amount of City players that didn't even play for their international teams that just, said that they had this injury, that injury. Haaland didn't play for Norway, but Odegaard did. Grealish didn't play for England, but Saka did. Our key players were playing in that international break where their players were managing the season so that they could be at their ultimate stage at the end with the final games. Mistake. That's something that we have to learn as a club, is that if you're hitting your peak in January, you're fucked. You really need to be hitting your peak right after that international break. And 2 seasons in a row, we've fallen off right after it. And our players have played a lot of minutes in that. And from here on out, they should not be, our main players, like, they should be faking injury, just like Manchester City did, but that they know how to manage a season where we don't, I look back on that as like another bad moment as well. Thomas says Arteta wanted to go toe to toe, but the players were scared. So they were caught in no man's land where they were neither attacking nor defending. City came in with a proper game plan, done the job for sure. Kev says Jess is on point again. Bravo. Thank you so much. I think it's just like, it's just obvious that like, there's just some things that we didn't do right. We were too good too early. I think in preseason this time around, we probably shouldn't be going 100 miles an hour. And that's the youthful exuberance. That is part of the reason why we are where we are, but it also needs to be tamed. Players should not be, we shouldn't be nowhere near our peak until, February, March, April. And we had really kind of like hit as good as we could have been at that point. And we were managing up until that, beyond that, and that also comes with, then the conversation. There's 180 of you guys in here. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, get in the chat. But there's also, the managing the squad as well. And I think that's another thing. And like, I know that Manchester City have a different level of quality in their squad, but it doesn't matter. I think you deal with what you have, and whatever resources you have, you use them to the best of your ability. And I think spending so much time trusting the likes of Holding and Mo Elneny for me is just not something that we should be doing beyond this point. Those 2 players should be given coaching roles, moved on. Good teams don't rely on those players because they inevitably will end up playing important games for you, and they're never, ever good enough. And that's not to say that they're not nice guys and they don't add some sort of value to the squad in terms of the culture, but they can be cultural figures in a coaching role or in a supportive role. They don't need to take up a squad position that could be, given to somebody that can actually give us some sort of quality when we really need it. And then managing the gray areas of the squad, giving players runs in the season when it's not too pressurized. So when we have to use them later on down the line, they're not unusable. So this is something else that I wrote down, is Tomiyasu, Tierney, Kivior, Jorginho, and Vieira are all quality players. I know some of you guys will disagree with some of that, but I still think they're all quality players to certain degrees that were all basically useless to us for the majority of the season. And that's 115 million pounds worth of players that kind of were like, we couldn't use them. It was like we got Kivior, we didn't play him until, the Europa League. And I think like it made it so that what was the point of buying him in January if we weren't going to give him any sort of playing time, so that when it came down to it, like, he could have been somebody who, this is just something, throwing it out there, but losing Tommy really hurt us. But if we had another center back that we, had some trust in, he may have been able to play left back, in some of the games where we needed a more solid option. But he ended up being kind of useless to us and only thrown in under pressure, where if he had like just maybe a 2-game run in the team. And I know people will say, well, without Gabriel, we would have just not been able to win a game, but we would have. If you had Saliba and Kivior and all the other players and we're playing, at Fulham away from home, we would have still won that game, and that's how you give players confidence, is when it's not as like do or die in that moment. For his first game to be in a European, quarterfinal away from home at Sporting, I felt like was just like not the right moment to introduce him. And from that moment, he became useless because he had a poor game. Jorginho, didn't use him enough. What was the point of bringing him in if we weren't going to use him? His best position in a double pivot, used him in a 6. His confidence was shot from there. Like, he never really looked the same after he played in that in those games against Sporting. Useless. Vieira, another player that just never got enough playing time. So when we wanted to use him, we couldn't. Useless. Tomiyasu, I know that he had his injury issues, but again, this is another player that the only time that we had any sort of tactical flexibility throughout the season was when we used him against Liverpool. And he should have been used more in that role. He should have been used more in that role against teams that have the big, players that like want to run and have like they're really good on transition. He's better than Zinchenko in that. Should have used him more. And probably the biggest, example of this is Kieran Tierney, a quality player that was pretty much useless to us all season, probably a 40 million pound player at this point that we couldn't even use because he hadn't gotten any playing time. So he was rusty. He was only playing with, the Europa League team. Once those minutes were done, he didn't have the freshness or the confidence or, the tactics to allow him to thrive. So we had about 5 players on our bench, quality players that we couldn't even use. The only players like within on the bench, that squad players that were consistent for us, were Trossard, Nelson to a certain extent, and Eddie Nketiah. That's not good enough, and I know that it's risky to use players, when the starting 11 is playing so well, but the starting 11 ran out of gas 5 games before the season is done, and maybe if they had some rest here and there and some competition, they would have been able to carry through the entire season. It's about managing. Again, we've played the same starting 12, 13 players for the entire season. They have come up short again. And we had so many players on the bench that everybody is saying are just crap players, but they're actually not. They just haven't been used. They don't have any confidence. You can't call on them every once in a while and expect them to have worldy games. They have to have some consistent game time. And like, one of the things that Pep does really well is like you almost have a period of the season. Jack Grealish was like barely used at the beginning of the season, but he came in after the World Cup and he had like a run of games. At the end of the season, they used Mahrez a little bit more. Certain players play for certain periods of the season and then they get a run and then another player comes in and takes their position. And then like, I think Kevin De Bruyne, Bernardo Silva, and Gundogan have all played 28 games. Those are their 3/8. They've all played 28 games. So the rotation has been like pretty much perfect, But right now it's like it's just Odegaard and Xhaka. They play every single minute. They've played more games than those 3. But Vieira has no minutes, ESR has no minutes. And so it's one of those where next season he has to do a little bit more than that. Like he has to rotate the squad, and give people runs in the games. Like he has to give them 3 or 4 games. Like you can't give them 20 minutes here or there and expect them to be usable in important games when we really need them. And if there's something to the fact that the players that are on the bench never look like they have confidence. Trossard had confidence, I think, coming from Brighton and being excited and all that kind of stuff. But everybody else, it's kind of like they come in and just go flat. And you got to use the group better. I don't think our players are so bad, and it's weird that the only players that get runs in games that have trust and all that kind of stuff are the players that are like Holding and Mo Aneni, and neither of them are good enough, Let's see. Aha says, just remember that Vieira and Keane documentary. They asked Vieira what was Wenger's biggest strength and weakness, and he said the same thing for both: trust of players. It's a strength and a weakness, you know. I feel like I've seen that before, but it's a strength and a weakness. It could really, you know, help certain players, but also be a hindrance when you have players that you should not be trusting. You know. Let's see. Chris says, imagine comparing Mahrez, Foden, and co. to Reece and Vieira and co. I mean, I'm not comparing them. I never said that they were the same types of players or the same quality, but I also don't believe that those players are so poor that they don't deserve more minutes so that they could be usable in games where we need them. So I never compared them. And the thing is just because those players are really, really good players, and I think it's a cop-out for Arsenal fans to say that because they have a different level of quality and resources available to them, that Arteta's usage and, you know, management of the squad has been fine. You know, I think irrespective of what they have, the usage of our squad has not been good enough. I don't really care what Manchester City have. I care about what Arsenal have, you know. Sayeda says, do you think because last season Arteta tinkered with the system a lot when players were out and there wasn't much improvement, he tried to just stick to the same one? I think what he did this season was try to make sure that he secured Champions League. I think that's what he wanted to do. I think he wanted to secure Champions League with games to spare, because we've talked about this before, is that there's always a consequence to every action. And so even though a lot of us kind of wanted him to use stronger lineups in the cups so that we could have went further in those, the consequence of that is maybe we drop points in the league when we probably shouldn't have. And so if that were the case, we'd be in a top 4 scrap without Champions League secured. And my thought was, the minute that we had Champions League secured yesterday, was I can mentally check out of the season from like a nervous standpoint, because just imagine playing that game, you know, let's not even that, like, let's say that we had the schedule that we have from now into the end of the season with Holding at the back, with Saliba not coming back into the team, knowing that we had to qualify for Champions League and it was not secured at this point. Do you think that this team would play Chelsea? You know, let's say they had to play Man City yesterday, Chelsea, Brighton, Newcastle, you know, all these teams with Champions League qualification on the line. You know, I do think that Arsenal were like, you know, what do we do? Do we try to push to make sure that we secure Champions League, maybe win a Premier League, or do we roll the dice, play stronger teams in those cups, and potentially, you know, maybe weaken our position in the league? I'm happy we have Champions League secured. And I think that's why Arteta didn't tinker with it as much, because he knew that starting 11, 12, 13 players could get us over the line early for Champions League. And also secure, like, really perfecting plan A. But in perfecting plan A, we have virtually no plan B, and that's the next step for this group. We need to have a different way of playing, because you're never going to beat Pep at his own game. You're actually never going to be able to beat Klopp either. Like, I know we beat Klopp and Liverpool at the beginning of the season, but it was marginal, and then we drew to them. The thing about those two teams is that you can't beat Pep at his own game, and Klopp knows how to beat that system that Pep plays, you know. So those two teams you're never going to be able to do anything really against, nothing significant, playing that system. So we have to have other options and other ways of, you know, getting up the pitch. And really, we don't have a long ball scenario where we can kick it long and have somebody hold it up and get us out of trouble, because right now we have to pass it 12, 15 times to get out. You know, so I think that's why Arteta stuck with it, was to make sure we perfected plan A. And plan A, basically, we beat 90% of the teams in the league with plan A. And now we need a layer of plan B, because that doesn't compete with Pep. That won't compete with Klopp long term. And it also won't help us in Europe, because in Europe, our plan A doesn't work, you know. And we had to get Champions League. If we didn't, you can't re-sign Saka and you can't re-sign Saliba. And I think they were unwilling to risk it. Amira says Arteta's inflexibility is his biggest issue. Why not try different systems towards the end of the games just because? Why does the same 11 have to play weekly? Rotation is different from dropping players. Well, I do agree with the inflexibility. I think it's something that it's not something that I don't think Arteta can do, because we remember when he first came in, he worked with the players that he had and tried to build a system that was, would help them. And then he disbanded that because he started to get the backing, and then now he can play it with the way that he wants to play. But in terms of I think his inflexibility with the squad management is more of a problem with me than, not trying a different system at the end of games, because I don't really see many managers doing that. But I think going into big games where we're probably not at our best, and going up against teams that our style of play doesn't necessarily really work against so much, we need different options. And I'm not sure that we actually have to try those at the end of games, but it should be tried in training. And clearly it's not. And yeah, like the same starting 11, like he needs to get over that. Like that's not going to help us. He has to trust other players. And it's weird to me that Holding and Mo Elneny get trust, but like Vieira, Kivior, Jorginho, these guys have no trust, and they're better players than those guys. Yo-Yo says that's an issue for Arteta to develop. He needs to permit players the chance to catch rhythm, like when schoolgirls do double dutch. I was never good at double dutch, but yeah, I agree. I think you have to have that trust in a player and give them the chance to make mistakes and not be perfect. I think, it wouldn't have hurt Odegaard to sit for some games, it wouldn't have hurt, and let Vieira play some games, especially when he was actually playing okay. I think when you see Arsenal players, they come in, sometimes there's to me, a little bit of a pattern of confidence and then that drop of confidence, and they're basically useless. And Vieira, when he first came in, he was playing much better, I thought, than he's playing now. And I think his confidence just dropped. He's not getting any playing time. Sambi, similar. He's a player that really had a lot of confidence when he first came in. He was playing for Thomas Partey because Partey was not fit. And he played those first couple of games. He was fine. Then he was dropped and he didn't play very many other games. Confidence gone. He's out. And I think that is a pattern that you can kind of see, with Arteta. And it's kind of like you have to, these players, they cost money, they're resources, and we're not Man City. We can't just have players sitting around that are useless and don't have, we can't use them at certain points. And I just don't see, when players come out there, they look scared to death, to make a mistake or whatever. And maybe it's because they know they may not get another chance to play. And maybe if you gave them a little bit of that, I'm gonna give you 3 or 4 games, to really get your feet underneath you. This is your period. I need you to take advantage of it. Maybe they do better. But Vieira playing 1 game here against Brentford, and then 6-7 games go by. Then he plays, half a game against Wolves, and Kivior playing against Sporting 1 time. And then the next time that you see him, he's coming in against, Liverpool. That ain't good enough. It's not good enough. And even with Jorginho, I feel the same way. What was the point of bringing him in if we weren't going to use him? And you didn't have to drop Partey for him, but you could have played a double pivot with them and tried something different. It's just, there's so much, I feel wastage sometimes, Coach Dave says Arteta's man management hasn't improved at all. I think his I think just either likes players or he doesn't, and I think that's the problem is I don't think we're in a position where you can show your hand like that. Mamang says, why Odegaard always miss in big games? I don't know, I'm not sure. Boy says, I wonder if any of Messi or Ronaldo's coaches has ever had them G'd up for a key match in the season. I wonder if any of Messi or Ronaldo's coaches has ever had to get them up for matches. I don't know. I do think a coach has a responsibility to facilitate an environment that allows players to be in a good mental space when they're under pressure. If that makes sense. I don't think it's their job to get a player up for a match, but if the environment is stressful around them because of the choices maybe the manager has made, or, some players just don't feel that confidence, I do feel like that's a management issue. And I do have this thing about when we get into big games, we just look like we can't be asked to be there. Like we're not excited to be in that scenario. And we haven't looked excited to be in the title race for a couple of weeks now. And that worries me because they should be excited to be in that situation. They were excited when it was easy, but as soon as it got hard, then we went back into, well, it's been a good season. That started even like weeks before, like before the Man City game, is they started coming out with interviews talking about it's still a good season and blah, blah, blah. And that's not really what you want to hear. You don't want to hear that. You want to hear hungry players that are like, we're going to go for the title no matter what. We're going to, and they're just, I don't want to hear another interview or anything from an Arsenal player from now until the end of the season, because they just blow smoke. Like they're not even talking about nothing. They just kind of concede. Jesus, terrible interview after the Southampton game. Ramsdale, some bad interviews as well. It's just terrible. The mentality is just not there, and it needs to, like, if they think that this was a hard season, they're going to be like definitely rocked like next season, because despite the fact that the media and content creators are not going to predict us to be in the top 4. I already know that. I can feel that, like there's going to be like this collective Arsenal are going to fall off, blah, blah, blah. The expectation will still be that Arsenal finish in the top 4. They fight for the title, and we have to do decently in the Champions League. And right now they were in a title race, where they had every opportunity to win it, be 11 points clear before we had to play against Manchester City. And then when we got to that game, they started talking about second and third is fine. Like, yeah, no. Boy says Odegaard also can't be captain when he can't get on the ball. He doesn't pass the eye test for being captain. I think he does in the smaller games, but he misses it in the bigger games, and that's where he needs to improve, Let's see. Fabricio says, Jess, do you think this team can challenge next season? Ramsdale, White, Saliba, Gabriel, Zinchenko, Caicedo, Rice, Odegaard, Martinelli, Jesus, and Saka. I mean, potentially. Like, I think from my perspective, it's like, I think if you get 2 midfielders in there, you get a striker, another attacker in there, you make sure that Mo Elneny and Holding will never play important games for Arsenal next season, then you have a chance. But it's also about, did they learn their lessons from this season? Because if the mentality is still that like second and third is okay, after being where they're at, then they won't challenge. They won't, so obviously quality and depth and all those things are important, but the mentality is also important. And if we don't get any leaders in the squad, it's not gonna help. Ultima Spell says Zinchenko needs to improve, otherwise sayonara. I think Zinchenko, kind of narrative is a little harsh. I think had he not been in the team, we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are, because again, Thomas Partey cannot play in that position by himself. So Zinchenko has had some difficult games lately, but I also think he's had some really good games. I think Zinchenko and Jesus have kind of proved a little bit why Manchester City maybe moved away from them. Not that they're not quality players, but, they were, kind of like squad players for them, and they became really important players for us. And I still think we should build beyond them, and they should be a part of our team, but not our everything. And I think when they became our everything, they didn't have the mentality and the personality to get us over the line. And so I think Zinchenko is a fabulous player, and I don't want him gone. I think he's a great, addition to the squad, but he can't be our everything, and Jesus can't be our everything. We need to find other players that can be our everything, or not really just our everything, but can get us over the line. I think if Tierney leaves, then we'll bring in somebody else. It's really a shame. I was looking at compilations of Tomiyasu the other day because I miss him. I miss him dearly. I really do. I think he's a much better player than people give him credit for. And I think when we start talking about like the next level for Arsenal, it's in games where we're going to have most of the possession in the Premier League, Zinchenko can definitely play. But against teams that are good in transition, that have physical strikers that can run, we need something different on that left-hand side. And I think Tomiyasu would be great for that position. If you look at old comps of him, he's perfect for that. And so, I think it's just a matter of making sure you have somebody that can play that position in those games, like against Liverpool, and not relying upon Zinchenko to be our everything, because he can't. He's a piece of a puzzle, but he's not going to hold you up. It's a harsh reality. Let's see. CeeLo says squad players talking like bosses. They're good players, but they're not leaders and are not main components in a leading title charge. They are a complement. And I feel like I agree with that. Like I don't think that Jesus and Zinchenko have done much wrong this season. I just think they were exactly what was advertised. They're great technical players that took us up another level. And had they not been in the squad, we wouldn't have been able to get to that next level. Zinchenko basically was what Xhaka couldn't do in that position. He couldn't do that in that position. So we moved Zinchenko up. It moved us up to the halfway line. Gabriel and Saliba did a lot of work, but in some games it doesn't work. And then Jesus in certain games, he wasn't necessarily like the presence that we needed. So we need different players. They can't be our everything. That's all that really matters. We're still building, Sean says typical Arsenal bottled top 4 last season and now bottled the title. Fair enough. Chris says huddle master. He just needs to stop that shit. Ultima Spell says, does Kroenke willing to spend in the next window? Man, oh man, we need players. We need about 3 or 4 for sure. Cool Dude says it's not the players, it's the evolution of Arteta stalling. I saw people trying to say that like Arteta hasn't gotten any better. It's just the players have gotten better and our players were the ones that did all the work and Arteta was just kind of like there. I feel like that's harsh. I think Arteta has improved this season. He's just still improving. And like, that's the issue with having like a manager that's never done this before, is that you kind of have to accept that he's a project in itself. The question is more like, I think once you accept that part, then you realize that like Arteta is not going to be perfect from minute one. And so of course he's going to have to learn to manage squads and deal with hiccups and tactically going to have to improve. More of the question around that is not so much like, why is Arteta not this guy? It's, should Arsenal be in a position where they have a manager that's also a project? And that's always been a conversation, I think, amongst Arsenal fans, is that, Arteta may become like this generational manager and all this kind of stuff. He very well may do that because he's young and this is his 3rd year in management period. So like the idea that he's going to have the same type of experiences and the same type of tactical analysis like the Peps and the Klopps and all these type of guys is just not going to happen. But should Arsenal have that type of experience already, or should we have a project manager? That's always been a conversation. So I think Arteta is evolving and is improving. Is that improvement and evolution good enough for a team that wants to fight for titles and Champions Leagues and stuff like that now? We'll see. I love Arteta. I think he's done a really good job rebuilding the team and the club and all that kind of stuff. But like next season, I'm expecting much more. And it'll be interesting to see if he can arrive to that challenge, because at some point Arsenal, next season, I think a lot of this feeling around like, okay, well, we're growing this young team. None of that is going to even wash. We're going to have Champions League money. I expect us to have a big summer, 2 midfielders, a striker or something. I'm actually growing or like moving to the idea of like needing a striker for Champions League. And some guys need to not even be involved in the squad. And then we need to make sure that the defense is in a situation where, no matter what, we can play that high line. So once that happens, the expectation is that Arsenal fight for the title, win a trophy, or go further in all these competitions. Like that's going to be a big learning curve, I think, for Arteta. I really do. I really do. And so we'll see. Lucas says Pep's team is really physical and athletic now. Arteta needs to look at that defensive left back and midfield with legs might be the next step. And based on who we're linked to, I think we know that. I think the interesting thing is that we upped the technical quality, which was super important to be able to play the way that we want to play. Like building from the back, being able to play the way that we play, technical quality needed to go right up. We had athletic players, but they weren't technical enough. Like they couldn't do anything on the ball. And so and they also didn't have footballing IQ. Now, I really do think like midfield is the issue. The midfield is always, Zinchenko plays and is so important to the team because Thomas Partey can't play that 6 by himself. So if he can't do it, then we need to get somebody who can. And that player needs to have legs, needs to be able to track runners, needs to not let Kevin De Bruyne run right past him, needs to be able to play every 4 days. We basically need our version of Rodri. And that's not Thomas Partey, and we know that. And then you have like Granit Xhaka. He's somebody that should have probably been replaced long ago. He's done okay this season, but that position has got to be improved upon. So once you get some midfielders with legs, and then you make sure like if Tomiyasu can't do it, then we need to bring in the defensive left back, make sure we have a right-sided center back we feel comfortable with. I think we're in a different position. I really do. Then we start to look at like attack, and it's weird because I do think that like, although we may need a right winger, and I think we do, I think we may be able to get over that, but like a striker might have to come in because, yeah, like a striker might just have to come in. Like I just have this weird feeling like Jesus is a great player, but another season with him, we might be looking at it like, ooh, we should have done it. Do you know what I mean? Sohan says the narrative from Rivals that we were just going to fall off next season is stupid. Young team getting better, and we ain't even nowhere near our peak, and we're already challenging pressed rivals. To be honest, like rivals are going to say what they want to say. Like they're going to predict us outside the top 4. They're going to say this is the last time we're ever going to get a chance at it. Don't really care. I just care about what like Arsenal are going to do. Do you know what I mean? Diogenes, if you don't want to hear me talk, then you can go. Blocked. I don't know why people come into like your chat telling you to shut up about things when like you don't have to be here. Nobody asked you to be here. Steve says we need 5 players. Can't use the 20 players next year. Gotta buy. I think quality over quantity still. Like I think we have a lot of players in the team right now, but like the quality isn't good enough. I think if Arteta has, 17 to 18 players that he feels really confident in using, then, that's probably like good enough, like top quality 16, 17, 18 players, because the other players, like they're just going to get like players that don't get playing time are basically useless anyway, so a tight 16, 17, 18 players is probably what you need. And we can do that and then just get rid of all the additional stuff, but I think some Arsenal fans think we need to have 25 players of world-class quality. That I don't think we're going to have that, let's see. Boy says, just get Baligan. Jesus can play on the wings. He's not a striker. I don't think Baligan is somebody that we should be desperate, like, to have come back into the squad. He's too samey to Jesus and Nketiah. And if we're going to bring in any sort of striker, it needs to be, I think we should sell Baligan if he wants to go and bring in a tall, physical striker with speed and pace. Like, there's no point in having 3 strikers and they're all under 5'9". It makes no sense. Like, it's too repetitive, so you have Jesus and Nketiah that kind of do the same things and then bring in something different. Yo-Yo says, I have no expectation of next season until this one finishes. There's no time for these players to pick their wounds. I think they're already feeling sorry for themselves. I think after the Southampton game, there was just like a collective, resignation and, just kind of like we're done and sulky and stuff like that. And they did that last season and it was really disappointing. I think there needs to be a collective, like looking in the mirror and saying like, am I actually ready to play for a big club like Arsenal and get them back to, winning titles, or am I just here for a good time? Because some of the mentality has just been like, for me, just like so disappointing, from everybody. CeeLo says, Ivan Toney, funny enough, Watkins is actually getting better at scoring, but nah. The player actually that I think Arsenal should be looking at for that center forward position is that Rasmus Haaland. I think he'd be perfect for us. He's obviously a little bit younger, but I don't know. I have this, like, Ollie Watkins not leaving Aston Villa. He just signed a new contract. Like that, they're gonna build their project around him. Like, so that's done. Ivan Toney, who knows how long he's gonna be gone. And I get big fish, small pond, kind of vibes from him, like Zaha, kind of thing. But Hoyland, I think would be perfect for like what we're trying to do. Maybe comes in, doesn't need to start right away, but can be eased in, and especially like play early round like Champions League, because that's where we're going to need it. Our game, the way that we play, is not good enough for the Champions League. It's just not. The games are more stretched. Nobody's just going to let us sit on the halfway line and just pass the ball around. We need to be able to play on transition. We need to have some sort of variation. And if the game gets down to it, we need to be able to throw players on that have something a little bit different and are threatening. And so that's where I think the big, tall striker could come in. But it needs to be the right guy, can't just be anybody. Mike Hunt says we need a few top-class players with experience and know how to get through tough games. Boy says we have holes in midfield and defense to fix. Jesus can play on the wings. Baligan can get his first team minutes. That he's allegedly so insistent about. Midfielders are not cheap these days. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't really care about how much things cost. Like, we've spent a lot of time outside of Champions League, and the Cronkies were willing to spend 90 something million on Mudryk. They were willing to put down 70 million for Caicedo, and now they're getting Champions League money. I expect that money to be spent. And if they were to just promote Baligan and have Jesus, Baligan, and Nketiah as our striker options, you can kiss anything goodbye. That's not good enough. It's just that is the typical Arsenal way to chintz out on a really important position. Like, either you need to buy a top quality attacker in the summer, despite needing two midfielders. Like, we've penny pinched long enough. Like, there's no point in getting into the Champions League and then sitting on your hands and saying, this is good enough. This is fine. We need 5 top quality attackers. That's what every good team has. Man City has it. Liverpool has it. 5. 5 top quality attackers. And right now we have 4. And we need another one. And Nketiah, Baligan, Reece Nelson, it's not enough. That's how I feel. I think we need to, I don't know, we need more. Let's see. African Cockney says, I was looking forward to your live. We're just chit-chatting, man. We're just chit-chatting, getting it all out there. Yo-Yo says, I still remember this fan base clamoring for Tammy and DCL to play at the carpet. We need better than that for sure. I just think Arsenal need to go for it. There's no point in penny pinching now, and I just, the Baligan thing, I know he's Haaland and we want to keep him, but he's too similar to Jesus and Nketiah, and you need to have something different. I don't see any team that would build, their team with 3 strikers and none of them are anything different, so move Baligan on, sell him if he wants to go. I don't think we're missing out on the next Haaland, because Baligan, he's not going to be Haaland. He might be a top player, but he's not going to be world class. Like, I don't think he's going to be that. And we need to buy the next best thing, there needs to be a ruthlessness here, Just a Jay says, at least Rob Holding has more goals than Richarlison. Yeah, I saw that. That was like the most ironic thing that I've ever seen was Rob Holding scoring the goal, but then in Rob Holding fashion, he's winking and stuff like that. It's like, read the room. TJ Warren says, I'm honestly so tired of people blaming Arteta then asking for an elite manager. No elite manager will come to Arsenal with our current depth. Yo-Yo says, Arteta renewing Eddie is, and it's rumored Reece is getting renewed. If I speak, I'm in trouble. Well, here's my thing, is that I don't want to panic yet. Eddie and Nketiah getting that new contract was shocking. I didn't think that he deserved it. And I think these purple patches that players go on, we should maybe hold our horses on giving them new deals. Every Highlander doesn't need to stay. And this is the sentiment is, I know we like to take care of our people and be a community and stuff like that, but you also have to want to win. And so Reiss Nelson for me has looked bright. He has, done well for himself coming in games, where we've needed him. But if you keep him, then I expect Baligan to be sold and a striker to come in. There's no, if that's what we do, we keep Reiss Nelson and we keep Baligan and Nketiah, and that's what we do in attack. I want everybody out. That's not a Champions League level, attacking depth. It's just not. And so keep Nketiah, or not keep Nketiah, keep Nelson, but then the money that would have been used to get a right winger needs to be used somewhere else. And it shouldn't be taken from midfield. I don't want to hear about, well, we only have a certain amount of money. That's not what I heard all this time. We have the funds, we have rich owners, we're in Champions League, shouldn't be any penny pinching. Get a striker in. If you keep Reiss Nelson, bring in 2 midfielders and some sort of defender, for whatever position needs to be filled. And then we go from there. Steve says Nelson is better than a few players who are Arteta's pets. Well, he's not better than Saka. So, I know people are low on Saka, but Nelson's not better than Bukayo Saka, But speaking of Saka, there's been a lot of conversation around whether, he deserves more scrutiny and more, criticism off the back of his last couple of games. Martinelli as well. Like, apparently they always go missing in big games. And, this is where agendas always come in. It's like people didn't like Holding being spoken about because, well, what about Saka? He missed the penalty. It's on him. Well, why are you talking about Saka? You should be talking about Thomas Partey. He did this. Well, why are you talking about Partey? You should be talking about Jesus. What about this? Why are you talking about Jesus? You should be talking about Arteta. Just because Holding shouldn't be out there and he's been a major issue for us, like since he's come in, doesn't mean that I don't think we should be critical of Bukayo Saka. Bukayo Saka is asking for a lot of money, and he's somebody that didn't want to sign a contract until he knew that we were going to have Champions League. But the type of money that he's going to be on at Arsenal, he has to be our Eden Hazard, and I didn't see Eden Hazard yesterday. I saw somebody that, I don't blame everything on him, obviously, because like everything was shambolic, but like he needs to be the player that changes the games for us. And, I think from my perspective, it's like, Martinelli signed a contract despite us even being in Champions League, so, Martinelli is somebody that I look at, he's down for it. But Saka was not about to sign a contract unless he was paid as like our highest paid player and we had Champions League. Yet and still, there's been some games where he hasn't been as good, especially like down the run-in. So it's not his fault. He deserves criticism. And next season, especially if he signs that contract, I expect him to be Eden Hazard. That's the type of money you're getting paid. And I know that people are like, well, that doesn't matter, but it matters to me because when you're getting paid a certain amount, you're taking money from something else. And so there's players that we won't sign to make sure that we keep Bukayo Saka. And so you can't just, you have to play on the tier in which like the way that you're being paid says, and that's why I'm more harsh on Thomas Partey than anybody else, is because he's our highest paid player. Him and Jesus are our highest paid players. And so you're getting that money, you sign that contract, and that contract for me says that you're the players that we're supposed to look to when things go, the shit hits the fan. Holding may have been an issue, but I don't expect anything from Holding. He shouldn't even be here anymore. It's not his fault that he's here. He's crap, shouldn't be here. He's basically like a championship level player. He should not be playing for Arsenal Football Club. But Thomas Partey is 29. He's won things before. He's won trophies before. He's been around long enough at Arsenal and been missing enough at Arsenal where we should have expectations of him now, and he hasn't met those. So it's not just on Saka because he missed that penalty and he hasn't been good enough, even though he deserves criticism. It's not just on Jesus because, he didn't play well against Southampton. He went missing. It's not just on Thomas Partey either. There's layers to it, but I also feel like there's levels to it as well. And players that are getting paid more deserve more criticism. And that's how I do things. And for me, the player that comes to my mind when I'm thinking who fucked this up the most, it's Thomas Partey. Like, that's the player I'm looking at. From West Ham, to Southampton, to this game, it was him, So, yeah. But the Saka thing, I get it. I do think there's still an element of people wanting Saka to get slander because they're upset that they lost the Pepe War. They're upset that they lost the Pepe War. And so anytime Saka doesn't play well, they kind of revert back to that. Newsflash, Pepe is shit, so let it go. But Saka, if he wants that contract and he wants to be that guy, then he needs to be somebody that's dragging us over the line from next season. And so there's a lot of pressure on him. He's done a really good job up until now. He's been our player of the season. For people that are asking who's our player of the season, it is Bukayo Saka. In most games, he's dragged us over. But he needs to deal with the pressure moments a little bit better, I think. And that goes for Martinelli and Odegaard as well. I think the three of them, for me, have had good enough seasons where we don't really need to be two-footing them. There's a lot of people two-footing them, more than anybody else. And without them, we'd be nowhere near where we're at. I don't think, they're young players that are, getting their feet underneath them and really we're seeing who they are. Their personality is coming out. So I'm not going to two-foot them. They deserve some criticism, but they have been our best players. And then you go down the line, Xhaka has done as good as he can, but he's not good enough. He shouldn't be here. He's not good enough. He's not good enough of a player, I think, to be a leader either. You know what I mean? Thomas Partey, shambles. And then you have Jesus and Zinchenko that are supposed to be the leaders, but they're probably not good enough to be that. So that's kind of what I think. And then, I think Ben White for me has shown that he has it in him. I think he's the type of player that has really blossomed this season. I think Gabriel has suffered being in that back line, but he's done all right. And we go from there. Coach Dave says it should never be Pepe versus Saka, yet another example of poor man management from Arteta. I mean, I don't know if Pepe was poorly managed because Unai Emery didn't want him either and didn't play him either. So I find the Pepe was poorly managed, I think he had enough chances where he never was played as little as Kivior and, Vieira. Pepe was here before Arteta was even here, and he wasn't particularly liked by Unai either. Pepe, I don't know. I think it was wrong place, wrong time for Pepe. He was too big of a signing and he was bad recruitment too. There was just so many things going around that. But Pepe versus Saka has probably been the most ridiculous thing that I've seen apart in this fan base. We should want both of them to do well. But I also think using Pepe to stick the boot into a 21-year-old is pretty disgraceful. It doesn't make sense. And look what he's doing now. I could understand more if he was thriving somewhere else, but he's not even thriving. He's not doing anything, And no, Pepe didn't win Arteta that trophy. He absolutely did not. No one player wins anybody anything. It was the entire team. The team defended well. Aubameyang was good in that game. I think whoever was, I think it was Xhaka and Ceballos in midfield. They had good games. Bellerin was good in that game as well. Tierney was good in that game. So the team won it. Pepe didn't win shit for Arteta. He played well in one game and that's it. So he didn't win shit for us. It was the entire team. Be for real. Maitland-Niles as well. I hate that argument, because whether it's Pepe or Aubameyang, one of them have won Arteta that trophy, but he doesn't get any credit. When we do bad, Arteta is to blame, but when we do good, he gets no credit. And I find that to be a little bit weird. Excuse me. Boy says Partey got some really bad news in regards to a situation with blah blah. Let me read this by myself, actually. Whatever. If that's the case, boy, then that's the case. But you guys know, if you guys have been here before, you know my thoughts on the whole Partey situation. We need a 6 in the window, whether he's here or not. Dale says, it doesn't sound like you think Arsenal will be good enough regardless of how the summer goes. No, I do think we will. But I'm not Although I do think that we're moving in the right direction, I don't think, based on the last couple of seasons, we all know that things change quickly. And so if Arsenal don't do the right things in the summer, we could be left in the dust. Now, I do think we'll do the right things, and I do think Arteta will work through these issues and get better. But, I'm not going to just say with like carte blanche, like it's 100% happening and stuff like that. I hope it does. I think it will. I do think we'll do better next season. It's just, I'm more concerned not just about, I know he's going to get backed. He's going to get good players. The mentality, that needs to go up. That needs to go up. There's multiple things. But the thing is if you want me to just like blow smoke and say like, yeah, like we're just going to be like the best team next season and Arteta's just going to be like the best manager and this and that, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Like, you can't just be collapsing at the end of every single season, and everybody just say it's okay because you're young. They're going to have a rude awakening next season and people aren't going to be taking the young player excuse anymore, but I do think that we'll improve the team and we will have every opportunity to fight for the title again and do well in the Champions League and stuff like that. But there's a lot of work to be done. We're not close. We're not as close as I think people say we are. A lot of work needs to be done. Demolition on midfield for sure. Yo-Yo says our midfield let the club down, and that's Arteta and Edu's doing. In my opinion, I've long cried about our midfield for a reason. Yeah, you have, to be fair. Yo-Yo also says the last time Arteta's side performed in spring was when stadiums were empty and there were water breaks. Abba wore the armband. Emmy was between the sticks, and Ainsley Maitland-Niles was a midfielder in defense. We really need to like manage the season better, use the squad better so that we can, have players be fresh and ready to go after that last international break. And quite frankly, they need to deal with the pressure better. And that comes with experience, but it also comes with players just having balls, and we've shown like collectively those balls need to drop because they're not showing anything, they didn't show anything yesterday. And I know people are like, well, City were just so much better than us, but that was a gutless performance. Like it just really was, TJ Warren says the fact that we couldn't get Caicedo in the door is a disgrace and we're seeing after the facts. Well, I'm not sure about that. Like, I know it's like here's my thing is I'm okay with being critical of the club, but only with facts, right? Caicedo was never for sale. Their own director of football was on the Beautiful Game podcast and said they were never going to sell Caicedo to us, no matter what we offered, because they have European football on offer, and they were never going to sell Caicedo mid-season. We offered 70 million for a player that's probably worth 30, maybe 40. And so we were never going to get it over the line because he was never for sale. We turned the player's head. His agent encouraged us, but the club was very specific. He was never for sale. So the idea that like Arsenal were a disgrace for not getting Caicedo, I think is a little bit far-fetched. If you feel like we should have went in a different direction than Jorginho, then that's, I think, a better critique than a player that wasn't for sale that we tried to pay over the odds for. Babe? I think he was knocking on the door, but I didn't hear it. Oh, I kind of heard it, but then I was like, wait, what? But yeah, critique, but with facts. You know what I mean? Simon Bond says, I guess mental training at Arsenal is not where it's supposed to be. Mental strength needs a build-up. Yeah, mental strength, I think we'd have gotten better in terms of the way we play. We also there have been games where last season we would have 100% lost them that we won this season. We've been able to come back, so last season, and this is why I do think people need to we have improved, not just from like a point standpoint, but like just in general. Last season, we weren't able to come back if we went down. Last season, we would have lost games that we've actually been able to draw. Like attacking wise, we've definitely gotten a lot better. Defensively, we're a lot better at the beginning of the season, but we improved there. Away from home, we perform a lot better. But what we haven't improved on is the mental side of the game, when it becomes crunch time and things aren't perfect, we cannot persevere. We become Goldilocks and everything needs to be perfect in order for us to perform. And even if it is perfect, because quite frankly, even with Holding in the team, I don't really think it's acceptable for it to be in a match that's like not even competitive at all. You know, so I think that's where the difference comes in, you know, the winning mentality when things are really stressful. Yes, like, you know, when we're losing a game, we can come back and stuff like that. That's definitely an improvement for last season, but that's a bare minimum requirement. Like the fact that last season we couldn't even come back from like one goal down was like, that's like very like below, like that's like very surface level. Like that was actually crazy to say that like we couldn't even do it. You know what I mean? So yeah, we need to really improve. We need to really improve. Tony says it's never done in football. That's why we love it. Arsenal 2003 says Arsenal are done. 6th place finish incoming. Champions League will ruin us. Arsenal 2003 also says we're awful in Europe. What's the point? I don't know. If you don't think there's any point, then why do you even watch Arsenal? Why do you even like? If I didn't think that there was a point for Arsenal and I was like that negative about everything, I wouldn't even watch content. I would just like watch the session, watch TV that I like, you know, check the scores on the weekends, not watch, you know, because there's no point if you don't think that there's like, you literally saying if there was the point. I think there's every point of being in Europe, you know, there's every point. There's the money aspect of things. There's the way that it looks in terms of Arsenal's credibility. You know, not being in Europe is horrible for a club of Arsenal's stature. But quite frankly, if I didn't think that there was any point in Arsenal being in Europe or playing because they're never going to get better and they suck, then like just stop supporting, you know, like save yourself. Come on now. Steve says have faith. Rev 187 says what's the point of life? I don't know. I feel like obviously criticism is definitely, you know, valid, but what's the point of us even being in Europe? Grow a pair. Nith says Europe will make Arsenal better, especially with the lack of depth over the last 7 years. And Arsenal 2003 says, Jess, you're so afraid every game. Now you're relieved. Of course, like I get nervous before every single Arsenal game, but I still watch it, eyes open, staring at the screen, hoping that the boys win the game. I don't think that all is lost. You know, as critical as I can be, we're moving in the right direction, and there's every chance that we'll be so much better this season. And so next season. So for me, it's like, you know, grow a pair. You know, if you don't think there's any point in Arsenal being in Europe, then what's the point of watching? Like, I don't get it, you know? I don't know. If anything, you can have some fun away trips, you know, traveling. I don't know. Arsenal Edition says, where do you go from here, Jess? For me, Jess, last chance with Arteta. I think this is a good way to kind of like end the stream because we've been talking for a while. But where do we go next? This is where I get real with you guys. You know, I think this is the problem, you know, is that I am not a Top Gooner. If you guys know what that is, you know what it is, or High Standards FC. And those are the two, you know, the binary options that you kind of have in the fan base is like people are either too positive or too negative. They're either High Standards FC, where if you don't win all the trophies on offer, you should be sacked. You know, every player is shit. Everything we do is shit, you know, and unrealistic expectations, you know, because your high standards become the way that you kind of have an ever-flowing like reason to be upset with the club so that you can make money on your channels and shit like that. And then you have Top Gooners that want to stay on the right side. So they want to make sure that they're always positive. Even when things are not positive, they try to find a spin for everything. They're very critical of anybody that says that was just shit, you know, or that wasn't good enough, or this player's not good enough. They always want to spin it into a good thing. They're the people that felt like it was okay for Rob Holding to get an extension, for Molineni to get extension, that are happy for those players to play because they're nice guys. Top Gooners, High Standards FC. I don't exist within either of those. I'm somewhere in the middle. you know? And so, I think there is life out off, like, I do think that there should be standards 100%. Like next season, if by Christmas we're not anywhere near the top four or something like that, we're not competitive or something like that, I do think we have to reconsider the Arteta situation. I do think he's had plenty of time, but I also think like Arsenal deserve to have a manager that is going to have us really competitive, fighting on all fronts, and learns quickly if they are a project manager. And so, for me, there's always a deadline. I think this season it was, win a trophy and get top four. And we're in a title race and we've finished in the Champions League spots like way ahead of time. So I can kind of bargain with that a little bit. Like, okay, we didn't win the trophy, but we were in a title race. We bottled it, but whatever. Get another transfer window under your belt and let's see where we go from there. But, if next season the same thing happens or worse and we don't finish in the top four, we don't have Champions League, or we go out of every single competition like with a whimper, things like that, we stagnate, I do think you have to look and say like, well, how do we make sure that we don't lose all the progress that we have trying to make the manager the project versus the club? Do you know what I mean? And so I'm down with Arteta in, think he's done a great job, but my expectations next season are very high based on how long he's been here and how much he's been backed and how big of a season it's going to be for us, knowing that we have an advantage that other teams don't have. Spurs, Chelsea, and Liverpool may not have any Europe. I think Liverpool might be able to sneak into Europa, but that's a big advantage for us. We should be recruitment-wise being able to compete with them for the same types of players, whereas before we couldn't do that. We should be really taking advantage of the situation and reestablishing ourselves as a top club. If we don't do that, we will lose that opportunity and we'll be back where we were before. Then you start to lose the likes of Saka and Martinelli. You lose those guys and it's all for nothing. So in my perspective, it's just like, this is it. Like next season, we need to win a trophy. We need to be challenging for the league. And as far as Champions League, we need to at least get to the quarterfinals. We can't go out of the groups or anything like that. And we just, we know what it'll feel like if we're competitive. We know what it feels like. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I think next season is like the one. I get that it's a 5-part thing and we're on part 3 and all this kind of stuff. But, especially like in this last round of like managers being sacked, there's been a lot of really good managers that have been available that Arsenal, could use, could maybe take us to the next level, so Arteta needs to either be that guy that's going to take us to the next level or we need to find somebody else, so yeah, there you go. So it's, for me, it's next season, do or die, Wake Up Mind says Arteta has to be consistent in winning something and the board has to give him the tools. We can't always go down like this every season. I agree. Carl says Arsenal needs to get rid of the mid and be ruthless. I agree. Sin says next season is delusion, I'm afraid. In terms of what's delusion? Amira says Carragher's article for the Telegraph today summed up our season so far, in my opinion. Just like Klopp's Liverpool in those years, they finished second. Arsenal have proven to be a good team at the wrong time. I kind of agree with that, but at the same time, like, again, we've had our own hand, in not meeting, our goal. But I kind of hear that, but also I don't feel that sorry for ourselves. I don't feel sorry for us. Like, I don't. Lucas says title challenge, not get embarrassed in Europe, and better domestic run. He has to win a trophy next season, I think. I think this season it was kind of like, okay, you went for the biggest one on offer. I agree with that, because if you reach for that, you get Champions League, you make sure you're qualified for that. I'm sorry if we were in this position right now that we're in, but we were, in a top 4 scrap and we had the games that we have left, we wouldn't be making top 4. We wouldn't, because we would bottle it from here, so made sure we focused on one thing, got Champions League. Now that we have it, we have to use it to our advantage. And we also have to make sure that we don't just go out with a whimper, so there's going to be, Chelsea, Liverpool, Spurs. I think mostly Chelsea and Spurs are not going to have any sort of Europe. So they'll be able to focus, that could be to their benefit or their detriment. For us, it didn't help us, for them, it may help them. So we're going to be in a position where our players are going to be required to perform to the top level in the league and also in Champions League. That's going to be hard, so they need to be ready for that. If it doesn't look like we're ready for it and we're looking kind of like suspect at the beginning of the season, I just think, we need to make sure that we are mentally prepared to move in a different direction and not be pussies about it, for lack of a better word. It's not that deep. There is life post other, the manager. I'm not calling for his head, but the amount, like the types of players that we have right now too, like I would just hate to lose the likes of Saka and Martinelli and Saliba, because we didn't, we were too busy focusing on Arteta improving than the club. That's my only thing. Yo-Yo says, my expectation won't be crystallized until the season ends. I've already made peace with the fact that Arteta is interning at Arsenal. Wake Up Mind says, Chelsea will always be a doubt under new ownership. They succeeded because of Roman, like City are with I get what you're saying. Sometimes the owners will push for the best. Real Bayern all does that. Yeah, you just never really know. But at the same time, like I think Arsenal have to think like all these teams are going to surge up. So we need to make sure that we don't count on them to be shit. We need to make sure that we're better than them, So yeah, Dipster23 says, I'll be watching the Champions League from behind the sofa next season. It's the real deal. So we will know where we are. I mean, and then the other, I guess the only other question I have is just like, the only player that's not questioned for me, because I know that they're a good player, but I do think that there's a level of growth that needs to happen from now into the next season is Ramsdale. I think he's somebody that can win you a game, but can just as easily lose you a game. And there's been too many games, I think, this season where he has been culpable for huge mistakes, and those need to be cut out. I think him and Gabriel they're so similar to me, where, they have improved so much to the point where it's like, that there's something there, but then they have these moments of like insanity where even like simple stuff, they make mistakes, like, panicking and giving away penalties, or panicking and, not getting down to like easy shots and stuff like that. And so those two players, I think, have done really well, but they really need to like up their game, because they're going to be expected. Those two are going to be expected to play every 4 games or every 4 days. And we can't have games where like Ramsdale is saving our asses, and then like the next game he's losing it for us in the first couple minutes. He's saving our asses, and then he doesn't get down to like an easy shot. He's saving our asses, and then he's flailing at, he needs to be more consistent and more like this and less like this. Gabriel as well, but he's done a lot better. But yeah, it's just one of those where the players are going to have to really get it through their head that they're at a club that their expectations are to win. And if they're not being told that in training, and they're not being told that, every day, then the club is not doing the right things, because they need to know that they need to be winning. It can't just be okay that they just go out group stages, that they flake out at the end of every season. Like, it can't be okay. Cincinnati says, really hope Arteta doesn't underestimate the UCL like he did Sporting. To me, I think that was like the best wake up call. I know that like it was painful the way that it happened, because everybody was like kind of chirping up on this, like, it's so good not to be in this competition, blah, blah, blah. So happy we're out of it, all this kind of stuff. But it just showed the level of competition. Sporting is a team that got like eliminated out of the group stages, and at home they absolutely destroyed us, albeit we had a rotated squad. But I even think with the real squad, they would have killed us, because the way that we play, we lack the physicality and the legs to have been able to keep up with them. They made it into a basketball game, and we were just like, we couldn't handle it. Like, even though, you know, it was Vieira, Jorginho, and Xhaka, which is the worst midfield that you can ever put together, known to man. You can never play that midfield. Arteta did it twice, but even if you drop Partey in there, he doesn't have the legs. Like, he's always looks half injured anyway. You know, so Arsenal need to also have the ability to run, and we just don't have it. And so Sporting for me was like the biggest wake up call that like we needed to be so much better to beat them. Like, the level needed to go up like 25-30%. Like, we were just we way below the level. You know, so hopefully he looked at that, you know. Yo-Yo says Rams will always be who he is. Gabriel will always be who he is. Think it's personality types, the way that we play the game, always on the edge. They are mental. They need to be able to calm that down a little bit. I hope it comes with age, you know. So yeah, but I say all this to say that, like, you know, there's still several games until the end of the season. I think, again, from my perspective, I felt quite a bit of relief knowing that Brighton lost that game, because with Champions League on the line, still off of the back of what I saw yesterday, I do have a fear that we would have just kind of fallen into a top 4 scrap and really just kind of, you know, exploded with nothing really on the line. Like, I get that, like, people are like desperate to finish second, and like we should be finishing second and finishing the season strong, but maybe with the title done and dusted and Champions League confirmed, they can play with freedom again, you know, play against Chelsea, who are awful at the moment, and beat them at home, and then kind of like finish the season strong and then just move on. But I am mentally in the summer now. I'm mentally in preseason now. Like, it sucks, but we have nothing else really to play for but just pride. And so if, you know, and depending on how we play against Chelsea, if they don't have any pride, then I don't need to, you know, I have no expectations, you know. But I've already kind of set up things for keep ourselves. So obviously we have that coming up. Season review, we'll have that coming up in the next couple of weeks. You know, but it sucks that the season has to kind of end like this again. The crumble is real. We have to just hold it. There's nothing really to, like, you know, we completely just crumbled and capitulated and collapsed in that game. And all the copium, it's fine. Like, I get that we want to make it seem like it wasn't what it was, but we could have played better in that game, and it was really disappointing. And Man City are like an otherworldly type of team. You know, the level of, I just don't think anybody is going to be able to beat them from now until the end of the season. I think they're going to walk the Champions League as well. They just look on a whole nother level. They will become the best ever, you know, Premier League team. And it's hard to compete with, but that doesn't mean that Arsenal should not try to get to that level. And I will not be okay with my team conceding. So they need to get it together, get in the summer, spend the money, and we go again. Make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel, get in the comments and let me know what you guys thought. And I will talk to you guys on the next one. Bye, guys.